It all started on a quiet afternoon in a small, bustling cafe. A young woman, juggling a part-time job and her college studies, had just sat down to enjoy a much-needed break when she noticed an elderly woman struggling to open the cafe door. Without hesitation, she sprang to her feet, holding the door open with a warm smile. The woman, dressed simply but with an air of quiet grace, thanked her with genuine appreciation. It was just a small, thoughtful gesture, one she didn't think twice about. But little did she know, this act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would completely change her life. As the two exchanged pleasantries, the young woman noticed the elderly lady seemed a bit disoriented. Offering to help, she guided her to a table and stayed a while. Chatting over tea, they spoke of life, dreams, and challenges. The conversation flowed effortlessly, as if they'd known each other for years. But what the young woman didn't realize was that this seemingly ordinary interaction was far from it. The elderly woman, though unassuming, held a secret that would soon turn this encounter into something extraordinary. What started as a simple act of kindness was about to lead to an unexpected proposal, one tied to wealth, power, and opportunity beyond her wildest dreams. What was the secret behind the elderly woman's identity? And how would this moment forever change the course of her life? Keep watching to find out. The young woman, her break quickly forgotten, stayed at the table with the elderly lady, captivated by her soft-spoken warmth and the stories she shared. They talked about everything from the little joys in life, like the perfect cup of coffee, to the struggles they had both faced. The elderly woman's words carried the weight of someone who had seen the world, yet her demeanor remained gentle and unassuming. It was a conversation that felt both grounding and uplifting, as if it had come at exactly the right moment for both of them. But as the hours passed, something didn't quite add up. While the woman shared memories of her younger years and the cities she had visited, she avoided specifics about her current life. She glanced around the cafe occasionally, as if expecting someone, and clutched her bag just a little too tightly. The young woman noticed but didn't press. She chalked it up to a bit of nervousness, perhaps even loneliness. The conversation was interrupted when the elderly woman suddenly looked at her watch, her eyes widening with a mix of worry and urgency. "I've taken up far too much of your time," she said, standing abruptly. "Thank you, my dear. You've been so kind." The young woman, feeling a strange pull to ensure she was okay, offered to walk her out. The elderly woman hesitated but then nodded, a small smile breaking through her earlier anxiety. As they reached the sidewalk, a sleek black car with tinted windows pulled up. The woman's expression shifted to relief, but the young woman couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. The driver, dressed in a crisp suit, stepped out and opened the door for the elderly woman, greeting her with a tone of familiarity and respect. Before getting in, the woman turned back and took the young woman's hand. "You've been a light in my day," she said softly. "I hope we meet again." And then, just like that, she was gone, leaving the young woman standing on the sidewalk, her heart heavy with questions. The next day, the young woman returned to the cafe, hoping to catch a glimpse of the elderly woman again. She kept replaying their conversation in her mind, wondering why it had left such a strong impression on her. As she was wiping down tables, a man in a tailored suit entered the cafe, scanning the room with purpose. He walked directly up to her and introduced himself, his voice low and deliberate. "I believe you met someone very dear to me yesterday," he said, his gaze steady. Confused and a little on edge, the young woman nodded. The man smiled faintly. "She was quite taken with your kindness. She'd like to see you again." Before she could process what was happening, he handed her an elegant envelope and left as quickly as he had come. Inside was a handwritten note inviting her to lunch at an exclusive restaurant in the heart of the city. The signature at the bottom read simply, "Margaret." The name sent a ripple of recognition through her. Margaret was the name of a woman whose photograph had been featured in a recent article about a prominent CEO's family. This wasn't just any elderly woman. She was the mother of one of the wealthiest and most powerful business leaders in the country. The realization left her reeling. Despite her nerves, she couldn't resist the invitation. The next day, she found herself walking into a restaurant far grander than anywhere she'd ever been. Margaret was already waiting at a corner table, her face lighting up when she saw her. "Ah, there you are," she said warmly, motioning for her to sit. Over lunch, the conversation felt much like it had at the Cafe Easy, genuine and heartfelt. But Margaret soon steered it in a different direction. She spoke about her son, the CEO, and the pressures that came with their family's wealth and influence. She hinted at the loneliness that often accompanied such a life, and how rare it was to meet someone who treated her as a person rather than a name or a status. Margaret leaned in slightly, her eyes searching the young woman's face. "I have a proposition for you," she said, her tone measured. "One that may sound unusual, but I hope you'll hear me out." The young woman's pulse quickened. She nodded, unsure of what was coming but unable to look away. "I want you to work for me, not in a formal sense, but as someone who can remind me, and perhaps even my son, of the goodness in people. You see, in our world, kindness is often overshadowed by ambition and strategy. But yesterday, you reminded me of something important." Before the young woman could respond, the air shifted. A tall man in his early 40s approached the table. His presence was commanding, his suit impeccable. Margaret smiled up at him. "Ah, you're just in time. I was about to introduce you." The man was her son, the CEO, and the moment their eyes met, the young woman felt a strange mix of familiarity and unease. He didn't seem entirely pleased to see her, his expression guarded. But Margaret, ever the diplomat, carried the conversation forward, explaining how they had met and why she thought the young woman was special. As the lunch continued, it became clear that the CEO was skeptical of his mother's judgment. He asked pointed questions about the young woman's background, her intentions, and why she had accepted the invitation. His tone was polite, but edged with doubt, and she couldn't help but feel like she was being tested. But what neither of them could have anticipated was how this meeting would set off a chain of events that would unravel hidden truths and force them to confront their own assumptions about loyalty, trust, and love. The tension between the young woman and the CEO grew as they were drawn into Margaret's plan, which became more intricate and mysterious with each passing day. While the young woman was determined to prove her sincerity, the CEO seemed equally determined to uncover what he believed must be her hidden agenda. "And Margaret?" She watched quietly, her eyes twinkling with a knowledge she wasn't yet ready to share. The question lingered. Was this just about kindness, or was there something much deeper at play? The answers were still hidden, but one thing was clear: their lives were about to change forever. The tension that had filled the air during their first meeting lingered in the days that followed. Margaret's seemingly simple request, rooted in kindness, had sparked a subtle but undeniable ripple between her son and the young woman. While the CEO remained distant and wary, the young woman found herself drawn deeper into Margaret's world. Lunches turned into regular visits, and soon Margaret began to share more personal details about her life, her late husband, and the empire they had built from the ground up. As Margaret's trust in her deepened, so did the complexity of her role. She wasn't just a companion for Margaret, she became a bridge between the CEO and his mother, who, despite their love for each other, had drifted apart over the years. Margaret's health, while stable, was beginning to show signs of strain, and her son, buried in the demands of running a multinational corporation, often missed the small but significant moments that mattered most to her. One afternoon, Margaret invited the young woman to join her at a charity gala hosted by the company. It was the kind of event the young woman had only ever seen in movies' grand chandeliers, tuxedos, and gowns that shimmered under the light. Margaret, dressed elegantly but modestly, seemed perfectly at ease, but the young woman couldn't shake her nerves. She was acutely aware of the whispers and curious glances from the other guests, most of whom were seasoned players in the world of wealth and power. When the CEO arrived, his presence commanded the room. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, exchanging polite smiles and handshakes, but his gaze found the young woman almost immediately. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or curiosity. He approached their table, his expression guarded as always, but Margaret greeted him with warmth. Throughout the evening, the young woman couldn't help but notice how isolated the CEO seemed despite being surrounded by people. He was polite, but distant, engaged yet detached. It wasn't until Margaret excused herself briefly that he finally spoke to her directly. "You've become quite close to my mother," he said, his tone even but laced with a hint of skepticism. "She's a remarkable woman," the young woman replied, choosing her words carefully. "I've learned so much from her." He studied her for a moment, as if trying to decipher her intentions. "And what is it that you want from all of this?" The question stung, but she met his gaze without flinching. "I didn't do any of this expecting something in return. I helped her because it felt like the right thing to do. If you can't see that, maybe you're looking for answers in the wrong places." For a moment, something shifted in his expression, an almost imperceptible crack in his armor. But before she could say more, Margaret returned, and the moment passed. In the weeks that followed, the dynamic between the young woman and the CEO began to change. Their conversations, once tense and brief, grew longer and more thoughtful. He started asking her questions not about her past or her motives, but about her dreams, her values, and her perspective on life. She, in turn, saw glimpses of the man behind the title, the son who had once been a boy eager to make his parents proud, the leader burdened by the weight of expectations, and the person who, despite his success, seemed deeply lonely. It wasn't long before Margaret's health took a turn for the worse. A sudden illness left her bedridden, and both the young woman and the CEO found themselves spending more time at her side. In those quiet moments, as they cared for Margaret together, they began to understand each other in ways words couldn't fully capture. The CEO, who had once questioned her motives, now trusted her implicitly. And she, who had once seen him as cold and distant, saw the depth of his love for his mother and the struggles he carried silently. One evening, as they sat by Margaret's bedside, she spoke with a clarity and conviction that neither of them had expected. "You two are more alike than you realize," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You both lead with your hearts, even if you try to hide it. And the world needs more of that." Her words lingered long after she drifted off to sleep, leaving the two of them in silence. It was a silence that spoke volumes, filled with unspoken thoughts and emotions neither of them was quite ready to confront. Margaret's recovery was slow but steady, and as her strength returned, so did her determination. One day, she called them both into the living room, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I've been thinking," she began, "about the future." What followed was a proposal that left them both stunned. Margaret wanted the young woman to join the family's philanthropic foundation, a role that would allow her to bring her compassion and perspective to initiatives that could truly make a difference. It was an opportunity beyond anything she had ever imagined, but it also came with challenges, working closely with the CEO being chief among them. Though hesitant at first, the young woman accepted, driven by the chance to honor Margaret's trust and create meaningful change. As they worked together, the dynamic between her and the CEO continued to evolve. Their initial friction gave way to mutual respect, and respect slowly blossomed into something deeper. Their connection, however, was not without its complications. The CEO, ever the pragmatist, struggled to reconcile his growing feelings with the responsibilities of his role. And she, still adjusting to her new life, grappled with the fear of losing herself in a world so different from her own. But it was Margaret who, once again, became the catalyst for change. In a heartfelt conversation with her son, she reminded him of the lesson she had learned long ago with his father, that love, in all its forms, was worth the risk. In the end, it was a simple act of kindness that had brought them all together, and it was kindness that continued to guide them forward. The young woman and the CEO, despite their differences, found strength in their shared values and the bond they had built. And Margaret, watching them with a quiet satisfaction, knew she had set something extraordinary into motion. As the story came full circle, it left behind a powerful message that even the smallest gestures of compassion can ripple outward in ways we can't begin to imagine, transforming not just one life but many. And as the young woman looked out at the world she was now a part of, she knew that this was just the beginning of a journey she would never have expected, but would always treasure.